The attic wasn't a place for memories. It was a place for things we'd forgotten we owned. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the bare bulb overhead, illuminating stacks of cardboard boxes and old furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts of a life we hadn't quite lived yet. I was only up here because the faint, musty smell of damp had been creeping into the upstairs hallway for a week, and Mark, my husband, was convinced a small leak had sprung near the eaves. "Just check the old boxes near the north window, Laura," he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead. "Make sure nothing's getting ruined. I'll call the roofer today." For 10 years, Mark had been my foundation. He was the calm in my chaos, the steady hand on my back. We'd built a life in this old Portland house, filling its rooms with laughter, comfortable silence, and the smell of coffee on lazy Sunday mornings. My sister, Sarah, had always been a part of that life too. Closer to me than anyone, she was the keeper of my secrets, my first phone call in a crisis. She loved Mark like a brother. He adored her like the sister he never had. We were a perfect, unshakable triangle. That's what I believed anyway, as I pushed a stack of forgotten yearbooks aside. The box was tucked in the far corner, sealed with brittle yellowed tape. It was heavy, and when I pried open the flaps, the scent of old paper and cedar filled the air. Mark, college mementos, his mother's neat cursive read on the side. Inside were the things you'd expect: a faded university sweatshirt, a few medals from the track team, a stack of letters tied with a shoelace, and underneath it all, a heavy leather-bound photo album. I smiled, pulling it onto my lap. I'd never seen this one before. It was probably full of embarrassing fraternity photos and bad haircuts. I loved seeing the version of Mark that existed before me. I traced the embossed lettering on the cover, "Our Journey," and opened it. The first few pages were standard: groups of smiling young men in baseball caps, grainy photos of campus buildings, a blurry shot of a concert. But as I turned the pages, the photos became more focused, more personal. There were pictures of Mark with a group of friends at the beach, then on a road trip, and in nearly every shot there was a familiar face beside him: Sarah. Of course she'd known his friends. They had all gone to the same college for a year before she transferred. I'd always found it sweet that their friendship predated ours. But there was something in the way they stood together, his arm always around her, her head resting on his shoulder. It felt different, more than just friends. I brushed it off as a flicker of retroactive jealousy, silly and unfounded. I kept turning the pages, my fingers growing cold in the stuffy air. The last few pages were empty, the black paper staring back at me, but something was tucked into the very last plastic sleeve. A single loose photograph, smaller than the rest. A 4x6 print that had been slid in as an afterthought. I pulled it out. My breath caught in my throat. The world tilted. The dusty air suddenly too thin to breathe. It was a wedding photo, not a grand one, but unmistakable. It was taken outside a small, sterile-looking building, a sign in the background reading Clark County Marriage Bureau. Mark stood in the center, wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him, his hair shorter than I'd ever seen it. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was serious, resolute. And beside him, her hand tucked into his, was the bride. She was wearing a simple knee-length white dress, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her face was pale, her smile small and nervous, but her eyes were locked on the camera. It was my sister, Sarah. The groom was my husband, and the bride was my sister. My mind refused to process it, to connect the smiling woman at my bridal shower with the one in this photo. I flipped the picture over, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I flipped the picture. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a date. June 10th, 2012. 2 years before I even met Mark. A year after Sarah had supposedly broken up with her serious college boyfriend, she never named. My world, the one I had so carefully built on a foundation of trust and love, didn't just crack, it shattered. I couldn't breathe. The air in the attic, thick with the ghosts of forgotten things, felt like it was crushing my lungs. I stared at the photograph, my vision blurring until the image of Mark and Sarah warped into a meaningless swirl of white and black. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, hoping, praying, that I had imagined it. But they were still there. My husband and my sister, frozen in time on their wedding day. A day I never knew existed. My first thought was that it had to be a joke, a prank. Maybe it was from a play they were in, or a themed party with a twisted sense of humor. But the details were too real, too stark. The sterile backdrop of the marriage bureau wasn't a stage set. The look in their eyes wasn't acting. It was a mixture of youthful fear and solemn commitment. The simple gold band on Mark's finger was a precursor to the one he would later place on mine. My mind reeled, grasping for any explanation, any foothold in a reality that was rapidly crumbling beneath me. I thought back, frantically sifting through years of conversations, searching for a clue I had missed. I remembered asking Mark about his college girlfriends. He'd always been vague. "A few unserious things," he'd say with a shrug. "No one worth mentioning." Sarah had been just as evasive about her own past. She'd told me about a painful breakup in college that had made her transfer schools. "He broke my heart, Laura," she'd once confessed over a bottle of wine, her eyes misty. "I just couldn't stand being on the same campus anymore." I had hugged her, filled with sympathy for this anonymous boy who had wounded my sister so deeply. Was this him? Was my husband the great, unnamed heartbreak of my sister's life? The thought was so monstrous, so deeply twisted, that I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. Every shared holiday, every family dinner, every knowing glance I had once interpreted as familial affection now felt like a scene from a conspiracy. Their entire relationship, the one I had cherished as a symbol of our blended family, was a lie. When Mark told Sarah he'd take care of her after her last breakup, was he speaking as a brother-in-law or as something else? When Sarah helped me pick out my own wedding dress, telling me I looked beautiful, what was she thinking? Was she comparing it to her own simple white dress from that day in Clark County? I felt a cold, creeping horror spread through my veins. The betrayal wasn't just that they had a past. It was that they had curated a present for me built on a foundation of deceit. They had watched me fall in love, plan a wedding, and build a life with a man they had both, in their own ways, laid claim to first. They had stood side by side at my wedding, smiling for the cameras, and their shared secret must have been hanging in the air between them like a ghost. My fingers, numb and clumsy, tucked the photograph back into its sleeve. I closed the album, my movements stiff and robotic. I slid it back into the box of college mementos, burying it beneath the sweatshirt and the track medals, as if hiding the evidence could undo the discovery. But the image was burned into my mind. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unknow it. I stumbled down the attic stairs, my hand gripping the railing for support. I walked into our bedroom, the room Mark and I shared, and saw it with new eyes. The photos on the nightstand, the books stacked on his side of the bed, the painting we'd bought on our honeymoon. It all felt like a movie set. A beautifully constructed lie I had been living in, happily and obliviously, for a decade. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The leak in the attic was the least of my problems. My entire life had a hole ripped through it, and I had no idea how to even begin to patch it. That evening, the house felt different. The familiar comfort had been replaced by a tense, fragile silence that I was terrified to break. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator sounded unnaturally loud. When Mark came home, he walked in with his usual easy smile, dropping a kiss on my cheek and asking about my day. "Find any water damage?" he asked, heading to the kitchen to grab a beer. I forced a smile, my facial muscles feeling stiff and foreign. "No, everything looks fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "Just a lot of dust?" I couldn't confront him, not yet. The shock was still too raw, and a part of me, a small, desperate part, needed to see how deep the lie went. I needed to watch him, to test the cracks in the facade before I took a sledgehammer to the whole thing. Dinner was a quiet affair. I'd made pasta, his favorite, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. I watched him across the table, studying the familiar lines of his face, searching for a flicker of the man in the photograph. He seemed so normal, so blissfully unaware, as he talked about a difficult client at his architecture firm. "I was thinking," I began. my heart starting to pound against my ribs. I was up in the attic all afternoon, and it got me feeling nostalgic. Remember when we first moved in? All those boxes we had to go through? He chuckled. God, don't remind me. I think my back still hurts from carrying your dad's old record collection. I found some of your old college stuff, I continued, keeping my tone light, conversational. It was sweet. You with all your track buddies. I paused, then added, Sarah was in a few of those pictures too. It's funny, I forget you two knew each other back then. I watched his face carefully. For a split second, something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of caution. It was so quick I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. He took a slow sip of his beer before answering. Yeah, for a little while. Small campus. Everyone knew everyone. He was downplaying it. The casual dismissal was an act. Did you two hang out much? I pressed, trying to sound like a wife making pleasant small talk. Sarah never really talked much about her year there, other than that she was glad to leave. This time he didn't look at me. He focused on swirling the pasta on his plate. Not really. We had a couple of classes together, ran in the same circle of friends for a bit, that's all. He was lying. The ease with which the words left his mouth sent a chill down my spine. That's all? A wedding at the Clark County Marriage Bureau was that's all? He quickly changed the subject, asking about my work at the gallery, a new artist we were featuring. I played along, but the rest of the conversation was a blur. His words were just noise, a meaningless distraction from the roaring in my ears. He was so good at this, so practiced. For the past 10 years, he had been living this lie with an effortlessness that was terrifying. He had built our entire world on a carefully constructed narrative, and he had never once slipped. Later that night, as we lay in bed, the distance between us felt like a chasm. He rolled over, his arm draping casually over my waist, his breathing evening out as he drifted to sleep. I lay there, rigid, my body tense with the weight of my discovery. His touch, which had always been a source of comfort, now felt like a brand. I stared at the ceiling, the photograph replaying in my mind's eye. The cheap suit, the wildflowers, the look on my sister's face. He was sleeping peacefully beside me, a man with a secret wife I never knew he'd had. And the worst part was, she was my sister. The two people I trusted most in the world had conspired to build me a beautiful cage, and I had only just realized I was in it. The next day, I called Sarah. My hands were shaking so much I had to dial her number twice. I needed to see her, to look her in the eye, and try to reconcile the sister I loved with the woman in the photograph. The lie felt too monumental to exist solely in Mark's world. She had to be an active participant. Laura, hey, I was just thinking about you, she answered, her voice bright and bubbly, just as it always was. The casual warmth of it felt like a betrayal in itself. Hey you, I said, forcing a lightness into my own voice that felt like swallowing glass. Are you free for coffee this afternoon? I have some gallery news and I'd love to catch up. Of course. You know I'd drop anything for you. How about the Daily Grind at 3? The Daily Grind was our place. It was where we'd celebrated her last promotion, where I'd told her I was getting engaged to Mark, where we'd cried together after our grandmother passed away. The thought of going there now, armed with this sickening secret, made my stomach clench, but it was perfect. The setting itself was a reminder of the bond she had apparently been faking for years. When I walked in, she was already there, waving at me from our usual corner booth. She was wearing a vibrant yellow sweater, a stark contrast to the gray dread that had settled over me. She stood up and pulled me into a tight hug. You look tired, she said, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. Is everything okay? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I pulled away and sat down, managing a weak smile. Just a long week, you know how it is. We ordered our usual drinks, and for a few minutes, we fell into our familiar rhythm. She asked about the gallery, and I asked about her new marketing project. The conversation was so normal, so easy, that for a fleeting moment, I wondered if I had gone crazy. Maybe I had misinterpreted the photo. Maybe there was a simple, innocent explanation. Then, I decided to test the waters, just as I had with Mark. It's so funny, I began, stirring my latte with unnecessary focus. Ada, I was going through some of Mark's old college things yesterday, and it's just wild to see photos of you two from back then. You both look like babies. Sarah's smile didn't falter, but her eyes, like Mark's, became guarded. Oh, God. Don't remind me. That was my tragic bangs phase, wasn't it? I try to block out that entire year. You never really talk about it, I said, watching her closely. You always just said you had a bad breakup and transferred. You never even told me the guy's name. She took a quick, nervous sip of her coffee. Honestly, it's not worth remembering. He was a jerk. Young and dumb, you know? The whole thing was a mistake. I was just happy to get out of there and come back home, closer to you. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her expression one of pure sisterly devotion. And that was it. The casual deflection, the swift pivot back to our bond. She was using our love as a shield, a way to shut down any line of questioning that got too close to the truth. She was painting a picture of herself as a wounded bird who had flown back to the safety of our sisterhood, when in reality, she was a vulture who had been circling my life, waiting. I felt a cold rage begin to simmer beneath my grief. This wasn't just a secret she was keeping. It was a performance she was giving. Every hug, every shared laugh, every piece of advice she'd given me about my marriage to Mark was tainted. She had positioned herself as my closest confidant while hiding the one secret that could shatter my entire world. She wasn't just my sister. She was an architect of the lie I was living. I pulled my hand back from hers, the warmth of her touch suddenly feeling like a burn. She looked at me, her smile wavering for the first time. "What is it?" she asked. I just shook my head, unable to speak. The truth was a loaded gun, and I wasn't ready to fire it. Not yet. I couldn't live with the silence anymore. It was eating me alive, turning our home into a mausoleum of unspoken truths. 2 days after my coffee with Sarah, I decided the performance was over. I waited for Mark to get home from work. He walked in, humming to himself, and dropped his briefcase by the door. The casual domesticity of the scene was so at odds with the storm raging inside me that I felt a surge of cold, clarifying anger. He found me in the living room. I was sitting on the couch, perfectly still. He found me. The leather-bound photo album was on the coffee table in front of me, closed. It looked like a verdict waiting to be read. "Hey, you're quiet tonight," he said, leaning down to kiss me. I turned my head slightly, and his lips met my cheek. He straightened up, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Everything okay?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was flat, hollow. He saw the album then. His eyes locked onto it, and I watched the color drain from his face. He knew. In that single frozen moment, I saw the recognition, the panic, the dawning horror that his carefully constructed world was about to implode. He didn't even have to ask what it was about. He sank into the armchair opposite me, his posture defeated. He looked like a man who had just been handed a life sentence. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "In the attic," I replied. "In a box of your college mementos." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. He just stared at the album, unable to speak, unable to meet my eyes. I reached forward, my movements slow and deliberate, and opened it to the last page. I pulled out the 4x6 photograph and slid it across the coffee table toward him. It stopped right in front of him, face up. Him and Sarah, the bride and groom. "Explain this," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "Laura, He choked on the words, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure desperation. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I countered, my voice dangerously calm. It looks exactly like what I think. It looks like a wedding photo. It looks like you married my sister." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "We were kids. We were 20 years old and stupid. It was a whim, a terrible mistake. A mistake you both decided to hide from me for over a decade," I shot back. "A mistake you conveniently forgot to mention when you asked me to marry you." "We had it annulled," he said, his voice rising in panic. It lasted less than 2 months. It wasn't real, Laura. It meant nothing. It meant nothing? I stood up, too agitated to sit still. I began to pace the room, the years of lies swirling around me like a tornado. It meant she was your wife. It meant that every time she came over for dinner, every Christmas, every birthday, you were both lying to my face. Did you two laugh about it behind my back? The stupid, naive little sister who never suspected a thing? No, never. I swear, he pleaded, standing up to face me. We were ashamed. We were terrified of hurting you. We made a pact to never speak of it again. We thought it was better to just bury it. Bury it? I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You didn't bury it, Mark. You just built our entire marriage on top of its grave. Our whole life, our vows, our home. It's all a lie. You didn't marry me. You just replaced one sister with the other. He reached for me, his hands outstretched. Laura, please. That's not true. I love you. What I have with you is real. I recoiled from his touch as if he were on fire. Don't, I whispered, my voice breaking for the first time. Don't you dare touch me. The man I thought I married wouldn't have been capable of a lie this colossal. I don't know who you are. I looked at him, at the stranger standing in my living room, and I felt the last 10 years of my life dissolve into nothing. The confrontation with Mark left me hollowed out, but the rage that followed was a fire that propelled me forward. The next morning, I drove to Sarah's apartment. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give her time to prepare her next performance. I needed to see her raw, unguarded reaction. She opened the door in her pajamas, a coffee mug in her hand, a sleepy, confused smile on her face that vanished the moment she saw me. My expression must have been terrifying. Laura? What's wrong? Is it Mark? Is he okay? She asked, her voice laced with a practiced alarm that made my stomach turn. I didn't say a word. I just pushed past her into the apartment and walked to the center of her pristine, minimalist living room. I turned to face her, holding up the photograph. Her eyes widened, and the coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, splashing dark liquid across the white rug. She didn't even seem to notice. Splashing dark, she just stared at the picture, her face ashen. Where did you get that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Does it matter? I asked, my own voice dangerously quiet. He was your husband, Sarah. She sank onto her sofa, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were suddenly freezing. It was a mistake, she mumbled. The same pathetic excuse Mark had used. We were so young. We thought we were in love. But it was just stupid. We had it annulled. It didn't count. It didn't count? I took a step closer, my fury making my vision swim. You stood beside me at my wedding, Sarah. You held the train of my dress. You gave a toast about how perfect Mark and I were for each other, about how you'd never seen me so happy. Was all of that a lie? Was it all just a big joke to you? No, of course not, she sobbed, tears finally streaming down her face. I was happy for you. I love you, Laura. I was terrified. After it ended with Mark, I was so broken. And when you two met and fell in love, I didn't know what to do. I was afraid if I told you, I would lose you both. I couldn't bear that. Her tears didn't move me. They felt as calculated as her smiles. So you chose to lie, for 10 years. You let me build my life with your ex-husband, and you never said a word. Every time I came to you for advice about him, every time I confided in you about a stupid argument we were having, you were listening with the knowledge that you had been his wife. How could you? I wanted to protect you, she cried out. Protect me? I laughed, a raw, ugly sound that tore from my throat. You didn't protect me. You deceived me. You and him, you built a wall of secrets around me and called it a family. The two people I trusted most in this world. You were supposed to be my sister, my maid of honor, not his first wife. I threw the photograph onto the coffee table in front of her. It landed face up, a permanent testament to their shared betrayal. She flinched, unable to look at it. All those years, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only a vast, empty ache. All those secrets. I looked up to you. I thought we had this unbreakable bond. We do, she insisted, looking up at me with pleading, tear-filled eyes. I shook my head slowly. Number, we don't. Not anymore. I don't know who you are, and I don't think I want to. I turned and walked toward the door, stepping over the shattered remains of her coffee mug without a second glance. The sound of her sobbing followed me out into the hallway, but it was just noise. The sister I thought I had, the one I had loved and trusted, had never really existed. She was just another ghost in the attic. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a crime scene, every surface contaminated with the residue of their lies. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city streets blurring into a meaningless tapestry of lights and shadows. Finally, I ended up at the only place that felt safe, my friend Clara's apartment. She opened the door at 2 a.m. without a question, her sleepy face immediately hardening with concern when she saw the state I was in. I collapsed onto her couch, and the story spilled out of me in a torrent of broken sentences and ragged sobs. The attic, the photo, the confrontations. Clara listened, her hand a steady presence on my shoulder, letting me unload the decade of deceit that had been dumped on me in the span of 48 hours. Stay here, she said when I was finished, her voice firm. For as long as you need. He can't reach you here. For the next week, I lived in a fog. I called in sick to the gallery, unable to face the world of color and beauty when my own life felt so starkly black and white. Mark's texts and calls were relentless at first. Laura, please, let's talk. We can fix this. I love you. Then came the messages from Sarah. I'm so sorry. Please don't shut me out. You're my sister. I blocked both of their numbers. Their words were meaningless, just desperate attempts to repair a structure whose foundation had been rotten from the start. Clara's apartment was my cocoon. I slept on her pull-out sofa, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of her familiar, comforting laundry detergent. During the day, while she was at work, I would sit by the window and stare down at the street, watching people live their normal lives. By the window, I replayed my entire relationship with Mark in my head, but now it was like watching a movie where I finally knew the twist ending. Every memory was tainted. Our first date? Was he comparing me to Sarah? Our wedding vows? Were they just an echo of the ones he'd said to her? The way he'd always been so supportive of my bond with my sister, was it out of love or guilt? I realized with a sickening clarity that I couldn't trust any of it. My marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a cover-up. I hadn't been chosen. I had been a convenient, unsuspecting replacement. The love I thought was unique and sacred was at its core a hand-me-down. One afternoon, I found myself looking at my reflection in the window. My face was pale, my eyes swollen, but behind the grief, I saw a flicker of something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a cold, quiet fury. They had made a fool of me. They had banked on my love and my trust to maintain their comfortable secret. They had underestimated me. That was the moment the fog began to lift. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. They had broken my heart, but they were not going to break me. I deserved more than a life built on secrets and lies. I deserved a foundation that was real. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, past Mark, past Sarah, until I found the number I needed. I took a deep, steadying breath and made the call. Hello, this is Laura Evans, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been in days. A friend recommended your firm. I need to schedule a consultation. It's about a divorce. The word felt foreign and final on my tongue, but it was also the sound of a lock clicking open. It was the sound of my own escape. A year later, I was sitting on the balcony of my own apartment, a small but sunny space in a neighborhood Mark had always called too artsy. A pot of stubbornly resilient geraniums bloomed in the corner, and the air smelled of city rain and freedom. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. It was messy, of course. Mark had tried to play the victim, the heartbroken husband whose wife had inexplicably turned on him. But my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Helen, had dismantled his narrative with quiet precision. We didn't need to bring up the secret marriage. The simple, irrefutable fact of his decade-long deception was enough. I didn't want his money or the house. I just wanted out. I wanted a clean break. In the end, I got it. I hadn't spoken to Sarah since that day in her apartment. She had tried, of course. Letters, emails sent through mutual friends, even a tearful, rambling voicemail left with my parents, who were caught in the bewildering crossfire, unable to comprehend the depth of the betrayal. I never responded. The bond between us wasn't something that could be repaired with apologies. It had been fundamentally counterfeit. There was nothing left to salvage. My life now was quiet, and for the first time, it felt entirely my own. I had left the gallery and started a small online business curating and selling art from local, unknown artists. It was a struggle, but it was a passion. Every sale, every positive review, felt like a small victory I had earned myself. I was building something from the ground up, on a foundation of honesty and transparency. Last week, Clara had called me after running into a mutual acquaintance. The gossip, she'd warned, was exactly what I'd expect. Mark and Sarah were together. Officially, they had moved into a new house in the suburbs, trying to build a life out of the wreckage of ours. The news landed not with a sting of pain, but with a quiet, hollow thud of inevitability. Of course they were. They deserved each other. They were two people bound not by love, but by the gravity of their shared lie. They could have the house in the suburbs, the curated life, the ghost of me that would forever haunt their dinner table. I took a sip of my tea, looking out over the city. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight was breaking through the clouds, casting a pale golden light on the wet rooftops. I thought about the photo album, still sitting in a box in Clara's storage unit. I had no desire to ever look at it again. It was a relic from a different life, a different woman. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but in its wake, it had also set me free. It had forced me to learn the difference between what is given to you and what you build for yourself. They had given me a life based on a lie. I was now building one based on truth. My truth. I no longer searched for foundations in other people. I had finally learned how to build my own. And as the sun grew stronger, I smiled. It wasn't a big, joyful smile, but a small, steady one. The kind of smile that comes from knowing you survived the storm and are finally standing on solid ground.